we have done that.
Right. So this is reconvening the hearings panel meeting that adjourned earlier this morning, having considered the item in relation to granting an easement over the Alexandra Waterfront domain.
Is now joining.
Welcome, Bert. Just reconvened the meeting. As I said, we adjourned it this morning for the decision-making process, but having done that, the panel then discussed the appropriateness of doing that in public excluded, which was the option that we had put down on our agenda. But bearing in mind that this hearing is actually not a Resource Management Act hearing as we'd normally deal with, it's a hearing in terms of a delegation that the hearings panel has from the council to make a decision under the Reserves Act. So on the basis that we will make the decision, and that becomes the council decision, there was no logical reason by which we should do that in closed meeting. So that's why the meeting's been reconvened. So I apologise, Don and Stuart and Bert, for bringing you back and for that. But we didn't think it was fair to go on and say, oh, it won't matter, we'll just make our determination and you know, it'll be what it'll be. We figured we should make our decision making as in the public arena as such. So that's why the meeting's been reconvened. Don, I note in the meantime that you have sent me a note which has been distributed to the rest of the hearings panel, and I just can't find it right at the minute. Somewhere there it is there. There. And talking about the interpretation of section 48.3 and how that works. And I don't want to, I'm not going to debate it with anybody. There are conflicting views from the legal advice that we've got about how that is applied and to how you've interpreted it, Don. And at the end of the day, you know, you noted that you could have gone to your lawyer to get a view, and you could have got a view that was supporting what you're saying or not. At the end of the day, the panel's in no different a position. It would simply then have two legal views that said different things, which is usually one of the most helpful things about the law I've ever come across in my life. So we still have to make that decision. So I come to the conclusion that from our decision making going forward, whether the interpretation of 48.3 is right or wrong becomes immaterial, because we've got two different views and they both are not without foundation. So that's probably the best way of putting towards that. I think going forward is that I'm going to take the lead from the legal advice that we have got in the report, and that goes through what we should be considering against when we make our decision. And I think from the panel, I think we should turn to page 57 of the agenda. And there you'll find is the way through the report from Andrew Lovelock at Galloway Cook Adam. Talks about the things to take into account. And I still think it comes down to the material impact of the right-of-way being constructed within the reserve. And why I think that to be the case is that in the absence of a reserve management plan, we're in a situation where we don't have any knowledge of what recreation is thought to be taking place on the reserve. So what I want to discuss with my fellow panel members is that should we be thinking then about whether or not a reserve management plan should be done before any decision is made on the granting of a right-of-way. And I say that knowing that that's just simply going to add to time to a process, but it probably would give us a fair way of making sure the decision we make, which will be for a long time, is the appropriate one. And what I know about reserve management plans is it gives the entire community a chance to take ownership of what is being proposed. Because I think what's highlighted here is that the only people that probably took any notice of the notification with the neighbours, and they took notice because of other, dare I say, vested interests or concerns they had, and the wider community who the Recreation Reserve relates to either A, didn't notice, B, potentially don't care, or which I think it's the former that is more likely. So I just want to discuss that with Martin and Stephen as to whether or not you think that is relevant.
Can I comment on that? I think as far as the public consultation is concerned, I don't think many people in the Alex Vincent district realise that it actually is a reserve, because it's never been maintained as such or promoted as such. It's a scrubby gully basically, and I think that's probably why there was a lack of submissions, and only people submitting who were directly affected, and that's not had, as we didn't get any submissions regarding Don's proposal. We only got submissions on issues that council has been dealing with as far as drainage is concerned.
And thanks, Martin, because I'm mindful of that. It's easy to say from that, and I think Mr. Calder hinted at this, and Don did as well, was that means the public don't have any concerns. But I guess that's a view. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I think it's a view that will clearly suit the applicant, and I get that. It's perfectly legitimate, but I just don't think it's that simple. I just don't think people have necessarily realised what it means for them. And then maybe it would mean if you went through the process of developing a reserve management plan, you may even determine that actually part of the land is not required for the reserve for that reason going forward as well. I don't know. It just seems to me that the absence of submissions over it does say to me that it failed to hit the mark. There should have been something that supported it or opposed it. Otherwise, that suggests to me that no one noticed, and that's not a good reason just to ignore it. Stephen, what do you think? You might be muted, Stephen.
I'm really getting good at that. I said I'm surprised that there isn't a reserve management plan for that area. I have been on that area, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think that's probably a reasonably good outcome. Otherwise, we'll be considering it as a reserve. And I don't want to comment on that unless we take that a little bit further.
Yeah, because I think what you've highlighted to me is that the status of the reserve, I think, ties our hands quite a bit, and we start to have to follow a legalistic process, and our options get limited.
Yeah,
and I don't think that's helpful to getting necessarily the right outcome or an appropriate outcome. So I wonder, I might ask Linda, from a statutory point of view, Linda, in terms of the Reserves Act, am I correct in the observation that if a reserve management plan was done, it could entertain whether or not an easement be granted over it as part of that process even?
Yes, it would, because we would have to give it consideration as to every possible use and any or the wants or needs of any associated parties.
Yeah, and so having had that response, I take that to say that would be, and I hate saying this, a less timely but a more appropriate way of making sure the reserve then was able to be used for its intention, and would make the process of granting an easement or not harder or easier, and I suspect potentially easier. Take the silence as being no one's disagreeing. Have you got any idea in terms of the process for a reserve management plan as to timing and those sort of things, and costs, and or at all, or not something you've experienced in?
Is this a question for me? Sorry, Neil.
Yeah. Sorry. Would you have any idea of the timing preparing a reserve management plan, or is it not something you would be involved in? It would be done by the parks team, or would you be involved in that?
So property would do that in conjunction with the parks team. We do have a number of reserve management plans, which are generally for our larger, more widely used or occupied reserves, and they do take quite a bit of time and consultation. So that's possibly why one doesn't exist for this particular reserve. That tends to be that some of the smaller ones fall into a bit of a grey area, and maybe they haven't always been utilised in a big way in the past, probably due to funding, really.
Linda, can you tell me quickly, without I'm going to go and try and find it, but in your report to the Vincent Community Board, did the reserves team, parks team, make any comment about the reserve as such? I'm just trying to refresh my memory. Can you remember?
Yes, I can. Gordy did go with us to look at the plan, and he did think that it was probably underutilised, and we probably had never really given it any thought in the past. He thought that the southern end, which is down there, is probably the most usable end from a council perspective, from a public park / reserve type perspective. It was the most usable area as such.
So when you're talking about the southern end, though, you're talking about the area closest to the river, or?
Sorry, okay. I'm no good with the map. So the end where the right of way is, that end there is probably the most significant to the reserve, in that it could be utilised as a lookout or a public picnic area or something to that effect, was what Gordy thought when he and Mike and I went to visit the property.
I'm wondering out loud here whether it would be appropriate for us to ask for the parks team to give us something a little bit more detailed in that respect about how they might propose to do a reserve management plan, or what they see the use might be, to the extent of even, dare I say, because I don't know that they didn't take a view on the proposed right-of-way as such, did they, Linda?
She's muted herself again, not me.
Yeah, Linda.
Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry. It was probably more about when we went and viewed the property prior to writing the report, so that we all had an understanding of it. And I do, by memory, think that Gordy had probably not really given that reserve any particular consideration, or council had not particularly given it any consideration as such, or what the future needs of it might be.
So I guess what I could say then is that from a statutory point of view, your report covers the statutory side of things, but the Parks and Reserves team, for the want of a better word, in council, haven't actually given a view on the proposal itself.
Correct.
So what I'm wondering is whether we should, one of the options we've got is to further adjourn this meeting to ask them for them to provide their view on that, because that might, in the absence of a reserve management plan, unless the applicant, and I'll come to you, Don, and probably ask you this question, unless the applicant would say, I'm happy to wait for as long as it takes to get a reserve management plan, but that could be a bit like how long is a piece of string. But in the absence of that, maybe one of the options we've got is to ask for a report to be given to us with what the administrator of the reserve has over the actual proposal, because that in the absence of a plan might inform us and make our decision based on better information. What do you think about that, Stephen, Martin?
Yeah, I'm good with that, because Linda highlighted the fact that the southern end, the end that we're talking about, had more significance than perhaps I had given it credit for. So therefore, I think it is important that we go through the process.
Yeah, Martin.
Yeah, if I'm hearing what Linda said correctly, if the southern end is from Gordy's perspective was the most valuable, but did you say that's where the proposed right of ways is planned to go? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah.
Yes, and I do believe it might be the eastern end, if I think much harder about it, if we were going to refer to it correctly. But the Poplar Grove end, that is actually where the most usable more public friendly. I don't know, that whole Gordy thought that it might make a nice lookout / picnic area type sort of spot, was pretty much how it went that day.
Does Don have a comment on that? Is that appropriate for me to ask?
Well, I'm not sure if how appropriate it is to do either of the two. Clearly, getting the reserve management plan is way out there, I think, and unlikely to be a reasonable time to wait. Getting something from the parks team as to the actual proposal might be more appropriate. Don, can I ask you, in terms of if the way this was left was it required a reserve management plan, that could take goodness knows how long. That would sit how with you, good or bad, or no, that would take too long? I'm talking 12 months probably.
Yeah, no, basically what I'd be doing then is asking the landowner to hold for a year, and I don't think that would be fair.
Yep.
If you go forward from that, then we have offered public footpath, like we're talking about a viewpoint and access. We're really offering that. So, and it would be then over to the council whether they took that up and developed it. So I think, I don't know what more we can do for the council.
Yeah. So the problem that we've got is that I can't make the council do anything in terms of taking that walkway and those sort of things. We can't. That our decision is yes or no. So that's part of the problem that I've got in that respect. So I just can't. As part of the decision, my understanding is we can't actually require those things to happen, and that's why I'm thinking whether or not if we were to adjourn on the basis that we were able to get some view from the parks team, and noting that would not reflect public consultation, it would only reflect the administrator of the reserve, which is probably better than nothing, given the public didn't pay any attention this time. That might give an opportunity for the parties to work to something that could be something that help the panel come to a decision that's not just going to be based on the very narrow way that we have to apply the Reserves Act.
Yeah. How long do you think that would take, Neil?
I think that's probably, well, in the current environment, that's probably hard to say, and I don't know particularly.
Would it be a couple of weeks or a month? Or
I would have thought a couple of months, perhaps, more likely, is my gut feel. I'd say, a few weeks, so that's probably a couple of months potentially. I would imagine, it's a matter of getting the time to go and do it, work it through, and then getting a report. So I would have thought a couple of months. How does that sit?
I think that's probably manageable. The people that I'm dealing with, the Perpetual Guardian, have been fantastic to deal with. And I have just written to him, in the last couple of days, just saying we were up to. He said thanks for that and report back to me. So I would be, it's not hard for me to ask him, would you extend for another couple of months?
I think trustees.
The absence otherwise is that if we don't take that option, then there's the risk is that our discussion was going is that the answer would otherwise be no.
Yep.
And I think that I think I'd be reluctant to make that decision today when there's a possibility of just seeing if we can do something that's better than nothing, and better than the public not as good as public consultation, but given in the absence of what that achieved so far, it will be something that I think that Martin and Stephen and I can then actually say, right, we've done the best we can by this, we've considered the options, and I think the view of the reserve administrator, being the council, is probably the most, in this case, in the absence of a public view, is the most appropriate one to get, and to be fair and not criticising anybody, that's not been provided to the process so far. And it's, when you stop and think about it, it's almost like saying, well, it's the one that we could have almost had first.
Yeah, no, that's fair. For me to ask for them to wait for a year, I don't think I could do that. For me to ask them to wait another couple of months, then I can do that. Just thinking about the process, and Linda may be able to tell us, when a decision's made like this, like under the Resource Management Act, there's an objection period.
Yep.
Under the Reserves Act, when a decision's made, say you got this report and it said go ahead with the right of way, is there a waiting period then? Like, do I have to allow more than 2 months?
My gut feel, Linda will come on in a minute, but my gut feel says that, and why we're doing this in public, is that there is no appeal other than things like judicial reviews and all those sort of things that we don't ever go to. We are the decision makers in this process. So, Linda, that's pretty clear, isn't it? We are the decision maker. There is no appeal to the Minister of Conservation. We have the rights for us to decide, because we have not the power. We have been given the delegation to make the decisions.
Yes, that is exactly correct. It would be about the process, not about the right of appeal or anything.
What we would be able to do, Don, is that we'd obviously, once the report was done from the Parks team and it would get to us, we'd better convene pretty quickly to be able to work it through the process. It's not as though we have to do a big, long notification process, and because the hearing is adjourned, we can reconvene it as and when we see fit.
That makes sense to me, and I can see that it puts the team that's in front of me, it makes it more logical to make decisions.
Yep. All right.
Can I?
Someone's going to say something. Who was that?
Sorry, Neil, Stuart here. Can I just make a wee comment there? You're saying there was no, it was a yes or no decision, nothing binding. I'd just like to make a suggestion really to Linda that when the Parks and guys, Gordon and that, go out for a site visit, whether they can get Don and I to meet on site, because I think if we can get a sort of a letter of understanding that Don could provide, or letter of undertaking, I should say, a legal document signed with council as a separate process to say that, if we've got this right away, we can, because it wouldn't be a big job to redesign the end of the right away to incorporate, say, 4 or 5 parks and seal them and put a curb and channel around. It's not going to add a lot of extra costs. So, and again, that would just help the parks people say yes, it's reducing costs for council. It's getting Don what he wants. It might be a win-win-win situation, especially with providing a walkway and, to the lookout, which is, what they've identified as well. So we can do that as a separate process, and council then have got the assurance that, yes, if that right of way is constructed and easement is formed, then yes, we will be getting the small car park constructed and walkway as part of that process.
Linda, I'd imagine that would be possible.
Anything's possible.
I think it'd be fair to say.
That would be above my pay grade, however. So I'm not sure how we would enter into that or what any implication of it would be, but I certainly couldn't commit to something or say yes or no to that and what the effect of that might be.
So, Stuart, I think the answer to that question was saying, yes, we would try, and if it can be done, it could be, but if it can't be for some reason, it'll be because it can't be. So,
no, that's right. Well, just on that, we've done that with resource consents before in situations where we've applied for 2D4C, and for whatever reason, say, for instance, rather than bonding, it's because it's out of sealing season, we get contractors to provide a letter of undertaking to guarantee that work will be undertaken when the weather improves and sealing season starts again. So it is quite a common thing, or a reasonably common thing, that we have done through the planning side. It doesn't happen a lot, but it has happened. We have done it before. So yeah, I'm quite happy that the council would be comfortable with that when we get something, because it's a legal document that is signed up guaranteeing that it'll be undertaken. So yeah, I don't think we'll have an issue with that.
Okay, cool, righto. So,
Neil,
who we got now?
Neil, Don here. If I can just comment, the principle of what Stuart's talking about of getting together and saying, how do you do this best to work for everyone, whether it's legal documents or not, makes some sense. And the best way of doing that is having people together talking about it. So that's my comment.
Yeah, I think of that. Okay, Stephen and Martin, are you happy that we adjourn this matter and ask for the council as the administrating body of the reserve provide their report on the proposal for us to consider, and hopefully as part of that report they would contact the applicant and work through the issues with them, and they might come back and say, hey, we think this is a great idea, or no, here goes why it's a no.
Yeah, I'm happy to go through that process.
Martin?
Yes, because I think we all want to see, we want to see some progress on this, but we also want to make sure that the decision is the right one from the legal sense. And even though as chair of VCB, and I look at that original decision and I don't agree with it, I think we can, with some thinking and some cooperation between all parties, make this possibly work. So if Don's happy to and understands why we're doing this, because I don't want Don to stop me on the street when I'm having a cup of coffee when we're out of out two and have a go at me, you see, because he's prone to do that, you know.
Yeah, no, you're safe, Martin.
Well, thank you. And we are recording this, so I can use that in my defence at some later date.
No, you'll be able to.
Yep, I think we're heading down a path where all parties maybe come to some satisfactory agreement. So I totally support it.
Well, I think the issue is they may not come to a satisfactory conclusion from the applicant's point of view, perhaps, but at least the stones will have been turned over, and we will then be able to make a decision based on all the information that we need. And I think it's important that for Don in particular to note that if we didn't do what we're proposing now, it may give you a window of hope. The decision would otherwise probably be no.
Yeah, I follow all of that, and it seems a good approach. So I'm comfortable. I've just got to got to talk to the vendor. But as I say, they have been very good, and we're asking for another couple of months.
Yeah, cool. All right. So on that basis, we'll leave the meeting adjourned. On the basis that Linda, can you work through the issue with the Parks team for them to report back to the panel as to their recommendation on the proposal, and then we have that to go by, and that'll help us. And my view is that takes the place of effectively otherwise a management plan in the absence of a public consultation process, and that'll help us make our final decision. So with that, I will adjourn this hearing, and we'll reconvene as soon as we possibly can after we've had that information come to us.
All right. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Martin, if the hearings panel support staff could just stay here to make sure that I've got the process right, please.
Okay.
Stuart Calder
is now exiting.
Have you seen?
Now,
Ready to talk?
Bert Kemp.
Yeah.
Is now exiting.
was that Martin?
You seen David?
Hold on.
Comments
Will I
in
turn
chat?
the recording off?
Oh, you can turn the recording off, yes, please.
Yeah,
Yes, please.
just a moment.